As road workers were clearing debris from a remote highway, they stumbled upon the aftermath of a recent truck crash. Intrigued by the scattered cargo, they began to investigate. However, their curiosity quickly turned to terror as they realized what was strewn across the road. Vince and his colleagues were left horrified, groaning and crying out in pain. As Vince's vision slowly came back into focus, he was met with a chaotic scene of blood, smoke, and fire. What in the world happened here? He wondered aloud. He slowly got to his feet, his knees trembling. Adrenaline pumped through him as he tried to help one of his injured colleagues, even though he hadn't checked his own wounds yet. His injuries weren't as serious as some of his colleagues, so he pushed through the pain. When he looked back at the truck, he saw it was almost completely on fire. "We need to move. It's going to explode again," he shouted urgently. But it was too late. The truck exploded once more as the engine and gas tank caught fire. As the men lay on the ground, dazed and hurting, they could faintly hear sirens growing louder. Vince tried to open his eyes and saw police cars, fire trucks, and ambulances filling the road. Then everything went black. "That was quite a hit," the doctor said with a smile, but Vince didn't see what was funny about it. "Where am I? And what about my colleagues?" Vince asked. The doctor chuckled. "You have a concussion from hitting your head. We'll keep you here for a day or two," he said, winking. "In the hospital." Vince was shocked. Was this doctor actually joking? He wanted to respond, but the doctor added something to his IV, and everything went black again as Vince passed out. Morphine, and a lot of it. He lay in the bed, unable to move, for what felt like hours. Finally, he heard something moving around behind the door. A little later, a nurse wheeled a cart into his room. "Dinner time," she announced. He was served food that looked like typical hospital fare, just as gross and tasteless as he had expected. He tried his best to keep it down. When the nurse returned soon after to pick up his plates, he tried to get some information out of her, but she seemed to be hiding something. Her eyes darted away every time Vince mentioned the accident. "Can you at least tell me how my crew is?" he asked, hoping for a sliver of empathy. The nurse left in a hurry, repeating that only the doctors were allowed to give him information. But Vince had been in hospitals before and knew that wasn't entirely true. "Wait, please," he called after her as she briskly walked away. He began to grow suspicious and asked the nurse one final favor. He wanted to know if his colleagues were doing okay. She paused at the door, her hand on the handle, and the tension was visible in her posture. "I'll see what I can find out," she said, her voice low and cautious. Vince had more questions than answers, but the morphine was wearing off and he could start moving again. He carefully sat up and placed his feet on the floor, feeling pain in his bandaged knees. Moving was difficult, so he leaned on whatever he could find as he shuffled to the small bathroom. He needed to understand why he was separated from his colleagues, what they had seen, and what the truck had been carrying. Back at his bed, Vince picked up his phone, trying to piece together what had happened. Then he noticed a tiny black dot above the doorframe. It looked like a small camera. Why would there be a camera here? He wondered aloud, feeling uneasy about being monitored in his room. With no chairs to help him get a better view, paranoia set in as he became convinced he was being watched. Vince paced back and forth, eyeing the camera wearily, feeling a chill run down his spine. Each passing moment made him more certain and more uneasy about the eyes he felt on him. Suddenly, he began to feel very panicky and started banging his fists against the door while yelling for someone to let him out or tell him what was going on. Vince! He woke up in a different room this time and wasn't alone anymore. He looked to his left and saw one of his colleagues lying next to him, unconscious but breathing. Vince couldn't get up fast enough and stumbled to his colleague's bedside. It was Curtis, one of his best mates, and he looked badly injured. Vince's heart sank as he took in the sight of bandages and the cast enveloping Curtis's leg, which was hoisted in a sling. "Hang in there, buddy," he murmured, grasping Curtis's hands gently. The door swung open again, and two doctors walked into the room. "Please lie down, Vince," one of them said reassuringly before helping him get back into his bed. "Today marks 3 days after the explosion, and there are some things you need to know," the doctor continued. Vince's brow furrowed as he settled back against the pillows, wary of what was to come. The other doctor stepped forward, holding the binder in his hands. "You're not in a hospital," he began, which was something Vince had already suspected, but you can't know where you actually are. The doctor spoke with a firm yet enigmatic tone, making Vince's mind race with questions. He stared at the binder, which seemed to hold all the answers, as the doctor explained they could keep him there indefinitely and showed him documents labeling him as a test subject. Realizing the gravity of his situation, Vince muttered, "I'm really stuck." He demanded to know what was in the truck, but the doctors only said he'd be fine and that the truck driver was in custody before leaving him alone. Once the morphine wore off, Vince, feeling stronger, searched for a makeshift weapon but found nothing. When a nurse brought food, Vince noticed a pen in her pocket. He discreetly let it fall onto his bed, covered it with a blanket, and hid it under his pillow after she left. He used 2 metal bits he found to pick the lock on his door. He woke up his motionless friend Curtis, who was confused and disoriented. Vince signaled for silence and listened for any signs of approaching staff. "Like, we have to go," Vince said, not explaining the whole situation as it would have taken too much time. "Can you move with that leg?" he asked, pointing at Curtis's broken leg. Curtis nodded grimly, determination setting into his features as he assessed his own condition, ready to attempt the escape no matter the pain. Vince helped Curtis move around, and the two of them stumbled through a long, well-lit white hallway with many doors, all looking the same and all locked. "Wait, stop!" Someone suddenly yelled from behind. Vince and Curtis tried to run away, but it wasn't easy to run with a broken leg. The men yelling at them caught up with them and grabbed them by the arms, pulling them back into their rooms. "You can't leave yet," one of the men said. "You'll endanger everyone." Vince's muscles tensed as he resisted, his eyes blazing with defiance, but the grip on his arm was too strong. Vince was done with the mystery. He wanted answers and wasn't going to stop escaping if he didn't get them. He made that very clear to the men a little later. A man wearing a black suit, standing out against all the white he had seen in the last few days, entered the room. "I'm from the government. Please sign this," he said, placing a document on Vince's bed. Vince was puzzled. It was a non-disclosure agreement, NDA, but he signed it anyway, desperate to learn the truth and leave the facility. His hand trembled slightly as he scribbled his name, the pen scratching loudly on the paper. The man explained that the truck that had crashed was carrying hazardous materials, and they were all exposed to it. That's why they had to stay in this facility, to prevent spreading contamination. Vince was shocked. "Am I sick?" he asked quietly. The man shook his head. "You'll be released in a day, and your colleagues will follow soon after. But none of you can talk about what happened, or you'll face a huge fine. Everything is in the NDA you just signed." When Vince got home, his wife hugged him tightly. The police had contacted her, saying Vince was in a health facility closed to outsiders, and she had been extremely worried. Vince felt terrible for not being able to tell her the truth and had to stick to a story he was given. As he rehearsed the false explanation, he felt uneasy. "I was just sick, nothing more," he practiced, the words feeling hollow. Fortunately, his wife believed the story, and they moved on, never discussing it again. As life returned to normal, the shadows of those days remained in their home, silent, but always there. Vince would occasionally pause, lost in thought, before shaking off the memories and smiling at his wife.